The first sign that you no longer exist is the silence. It's not a peaceful quiet, but a cavernous, echoing void where a voice should be. For me, that silence began at Gate B12 of the SeaTac International Airport under the unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights that hummed a tune of profound indifference. I had texted them from the military transport van, my fingers clumsy from nerve damage that still sang electric symphonies up my arm. Arriving at 1420, Gate B12. Mom is home. 18 months inside the sterile white womb of Walter Reed, 13 surgeries piecing together a body that had been shattered by an IED outside of Kandahar. I had survived. I had made it back. But as I sat there in my freshly pressed dress blues, the wheels of my chair locked. No one came. Not my eldest son, Leland, the one whose college tuition I paid from a forward operating base. Not his wife, Corinne, the woman whose calculated smile I had mistaken for warmth for over a decade. I watched them all around me, a chaotic ballet of reunion, a father lifting his toddler into the air, a young woman leaping into the arms of a man in camouflage, a grandmother weeping as she hugged a teenager who had grown a foot since she last saw him. Each embrace was a small, sharp blade twisting in the hollow space where my own family should have been. I began to wonder if they had simply written me off, a casualty of war who inconveniently refused to die. A ghost who had forgotten her place was in the ground. I had pictured it so differently. After all the pain, the titanium plates holding my spine together, the phantom itches of a leg that was no longer entirely mine, I thought someone would be there. Not for a parade, just for a face. A hand to hold that didn't belong to a nurse. But all I received was the recycled, chilled air of the terminal and the automated swoosh of the doors opening for other people's lives. 47 minutes I sat there. I counted each one on the sterile face of the airport clock. The transport driver, a kind man with pity in his eyes, offered to wait longer. I waved him off with a flick of my wrist, a gesture of command I hadn't used in years. Pride is a strange, stubborn muscle. It flexes even when your legs will not. My hands trembled as I unlocked my phone again. The message was marked as read. No response. I checked the signal, the time, the contact information. Everything was correct, except for the part where anyone on the receiving end cared. I had 2 sons. Leland was the ambitious one, married to Corinne, a woman whose every word was polished to a weaponized sheen. She had a way of making you feel archaic if you disagreed with her, once chiding me for preferring a handwritten letter to an email. "We have to embrace efficiency, Eleonora," she'd said, her voice smooth as glass. Then there was Asher, my younger son, perpetually living in his brother's shadow. He was a creature of passive affection, calling on holidays when prompted, a gentle soul who had never learned that neutrality in the face of cruelty is a choice in itself. Neither of them had come, not a text, not a call, just that damning, empty silence. The squeak of my chair's wheels was the only sound that belonged to me as I navigated toward the taxi stand. The driver's eyes widened for a fraction of a second when he saw the uniform and the chair, a flicker of surprise and discomfort. I gave him the address without preamble. I didn't ask for help getting in. I had learned to transfer my own weight, a brutal choreography of leverage and will. We drove in a silence that felt heavier than the one at the airport. The highway leading away from the city was lined with towering Douglas firs, their green so deep it was nearly black. The world was still turning, vibrant and alive. My name, it seemed, had been erased from the memory of the only people I thought would never forget. As we neared my neighborhood in the quiet, affluent hills overlooking the Puget Sound, I told the driver to stop 3 blocks from my house. He looked puzzled, but a crisp $20 bill smoothed over his confusion. I needed to see it from a distance, to approach my own life like a reconnaissance mission. The house stood just as I remembered it. A stately Pacific Lodge style, all river rock and dark cedar, with a wraparound porch where my husband and I used to watch the ferries glide across the water. Two cars were parked in the driveway. One was Leland's sleek German sedan. The other was my own pearl-white SUV. Corinne had insisted on staying there while I was recovering. "It just makes sense, Eleonora," she had chirped over a crackling satellite phone connection. "We'll keep an eye on things." It's only practical. I wheeled myself behind the thick, manicured hedge of a neighbor's property, the wet leaves brushing against my shoulders. The porch lights flickered on, triggered by an automatic timer someone had reset. And then the front door opened. A woman stepped out, silhouetted against the warm interior light. It was Corinne. She was wearing my antique silk robe, the one my husband had brought back for me from Japan, its delicate cherry blossom pattern a whisper against the twilight. She held a wine glass, its contents swirling as she laughed into her phone, a brittle, performative sound that didn't reach her eyes. Someone had claimed my home, my car, my robe, my life, piece by stolen piece. I expected to feel a surge of rage, a tidal wave of grief. But what washed over me was something colder, cleaner. It was the absolute, pristine emptiness of a battlefield after the fighting is over. If you have ever been methodically erased by the people you would have died for, then perhaps you understand what came next. I didn't go to the door. I didn't announce my return. I turned the chair around, the soft whir of the electric motor a secret in the falling dusk, and rolled away. I opened a part of myself that had been dormant for years, the part that had learned how to strategize, how to wait, how to dismantle an enemy from the inside out without ever raising my voice. Because sometimes the moment you realize you are utterly unwanted is the moment you are handed the most profound and dangerous freedom of all. And I intended to use every last bit of it. That night, I checked into a faded motel off the interstate, a place of transient anonymity called the Sprucewood Inn. I paid in cash and registered under my maiden name. The walls were thin enough to hear the man in the next room snoring, and the mattress sagged like a tired sigh, but it was a perfect command center. For the first time in 18 months, no one knew where I was. I was a ghost, and a ghost has the advantage of surprise. The next morning, I went to the bank. Not my familiar local branch where the tellers knew my name, but the imposing downtown headquarters. A different clerk, a sterile smile. I requested a full review of all activity on my accounts. She typed, her brow furrowing slightly. I saw the shift in her posture, the subtle tightening around her mouth. Something was wrong. Withdrawals I hadn't made, digital transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. And then, the masterstroke. A new family trust, opened under a name eerily similar to my late husband's, with Leland and Corinne as trustees. They had used the power of attorney I'd signed on a gurney just before my third surgery. The one Leland had assured me was, "Just a formality, Mom, in case of emergency." The betrayal was exquisite in its meticulousness. This wasn't a smash and grab. It was a corporate takeover of a life. The statements showed that Corinne had moved into my house 2 weeks after my second operation, the one where my heart had stopped on the table. By the 5th surgery, Leland had rerouted the utilities and transferred the title of my SUV. I kept my face a mask of placid neutrality as I requested printed copies of everything. I walked out of that bank holding a manila folder full of evidence, my expression as bland as if I'd just run a simple errand. From there, I went to see Alistair Finch, the lawyer who had handled my husband's estate. He was a man of old-world sensibilities, his office filled with leather-bound books and the scent of lemon polish. He blinked twice when he saw me, his composure visibly cracking. "Eleonora," he stammered, they told me you were unresponsive, that your cognitive function was severely impaired." He showed me the emails. A carefully curated stream of correspondence from Corinne, full of feigned concern about my declining state and gentle inquiries about succession planning. They had been preparing to bury me while my heart was still beating. Alistair, to his credit, had stalled. He confessed he was waiting for more concrete medical documentation, that something about their haste had felt unseemly, but they had been circling, waiting for the official word of my demise. The silence was over. My final stop of the day was a climate-controlled storage unit I'd rented years ago. Inside were the archives of my life, boxes of my husband's military records, the deed to my grandparents' original cabin on the coast, and a small fireproof safe. Within that safe were duplicates of every significant document I had ever signed. I sat on a dusty folding chair under the single bare light bulb and began my work. Page by page, I cross-referenced their forgeries with my originals, highlighting discrepancies, finding the legal fissures in their fraudulent fortress. By the time I emerged, the sun had bled away behind the Olympic Mountains. I drove back toward Port Blossom and parked on a hill overlooking my house. The lights were on. I could see the faint blue flicker of a television. They were living in my home, laughing, sleeping, eating off the china my mother had given me, all while believing I was fading away in a hospital bed on the other side of the country. I watched them exist in the life they had stolen, and the cold emptiness inside me began to burn, forging itself into something new. It wasn't hatred. It was purpose. The next morning, I met Isabel Rios. I hadn't chosen her from a glossy advertisement. I found her through a network for female veterans. She was young, sharp as forged steel, and her office was a minimalist space of glass and chrome. She didn't offer condolences or pity when I rolled in. She offered a notepad and a pen. "Let's begin," she said, her voice crisp and efficient. I laid out the contents of the manila folder. The bank statements, the trust documents, Alistair Finch's emails. She absorbed the information in a quiet, intense wave, her eyes scanning each page. When I finished, she looked up, her expression unreadable. "This is more than just misappropriation of assets, Colonel Vance," she said, using my retired rank, the first person to do so in over a year. "This is an act of identity theft. They didn't just try to steal your money, they tried to steal your existence. Our first step is to write you back in." Within 48 hours, Isabel had filed an immediate and irrevocable revocation of the power of attorney. We filed a motion to freeze every asset they had touched, triggering a forensic audit that would crawl through their lives like fire ants. Legally, the tide was turning. But I knew that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to simply reclaim what they took. I needed them to feel the same disorienting shock I felt at that airport gate. I needed them to understand what it felt like to be erased. They thought I was gone. I was about to show them what it looked like when a ghost comes back to haunt the living. For the next 2 weeks, I became a phantom in my own town. I remained at the motel, my movements precise and clandestine. My days were spent mapping their lives. Leland left for his investment firm at 8:15 a.m., always in a perfectly pressed suit, his face a mask of self-importance. Corinne's days were a pageant of performative wellness. A 10 a.m. yoga class, followed by an organic smoothie she'd sip while scrolling through her phone in my SUV. She had taken to wearing my favorite cashmere scarf, the one my husband gave me, wearing it not as a treasured memory, but as a spoil of war. I learned their schedules, their friends' names, the nanny's arrival time. They had turned my sanctuary into their operational base, oblivious to the fact that I still held the original key. One night, long after the house had gone dark, I made my move. I used the overgrown side path, bypassing the motion sensors I knew had a blind spot near the old oak tree. The key, an old-fashioned brass one from the storage unit, slid into the lock and turned without a sound. They hadn't even bothered to change it. That was the ultimate insult. They hadn't forgotten me. They simply believed I no longer mattered. I moved through the darkened rooms like a specter. My study was unrecognizable. My military commendations and books on history were gone, replaced by Corinne's design magazines and books on manifesting wealth. The scent of my husband's old pipe tobacco which had faintly lingered in the wood for years, was gone, scrubbed away by the sharp, chemical smell of lemon and entitlement. And in the hallway, on the antique console table, was a stack of mail. One envelope was addressed to me from the Department of Veterans Affairs. It was my annual benefit statement, unopened. They hadn't even had the decency to forward it. They had simply let it sit there, proof of a life they considered concluded. I took it, and I took something else. In the office desk drawer, beneath a stack of Corinne's stationery, I found the original Living Trust documents they had created. I swapped them with a carefully prepared decoy from Isabel, a version with subtle but critical legal errors that would render it useless. I left as silently as I had arrived, a whisper of justice in the house of thieves. My next move was not legal, but strategic. I contacted Serafina Morales, the director of a local center for women veterans. I had met her once at a charity event. I told her I wished to make a significant donation to a new project, a transitional home for female veterans recovering from major injury or trauma, a place to heal without the fear of being a burden. Her voice filled with a hope so raw it was almost painful. "We've been praying for something like this," she whispered. "We have a waiting list of women sleeping in their cars." I offered her my house. "It's currently occupied," I explained carefully. "Under circumstances that are being legally rectified, it may take some time." Sarah listened, then said something that resonated deep in my bones. "Colonel, most people don't give away their homes unless they're trying to reclaim their souls." That conversation set the stage for the final act. I didn't want to win in a sterile courtroom. I wanted to win in the court of public opinion, in the community they had so carefully cultivated. 2 weeks later, invitations went out from the Veterans Center for a special donor appreciation dinner. It was to be held at the historic Founders Hall downtown, a place of quiet, old-money dignity. On a private list of special guests, hand-delivered by Sarah, were 2 names, Leland and Corinne Vance. The invitation made it sound like a networking opportunity, a chance to rub elbows with the city's philanthropic elite. I wanted them there, off guard and smug. I arrived early, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy suit. I looked like a retired professor, unassuming and serene. No one would guess that beneath the calm facade, a soldier was preparing for her final battle. They arrived fashionably late, of course. Corinne swept in, her laughter a little too loud, while Leland nodded at acquaintances as if he were royalty surveying his subjects. It took him a full 3 minutes to see me. I was seated at the main table speaking quietly with a Gold Star wife named Rosalind. Leland froze. It was just a flicker, a momentary glitch in his smooth composure, but I saw it. The ghost was at the feast. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply held his gaze until he looked away. The moment came after the main course. The lights dimmed, and Sarah stepped to the podium. She spoke of courage, resilience, and the quiet sacrifices made far from the public eye. Then she introduced a special benefactor, a decorated Army colonel who, after her own harrowing recovery, had made an unprecedented gift to the community. My name echoed in the silent hall. I stood, my movements deliberate. Every eye was on me. "I want to thank this community," I began, my voice clear and steady. "Not for what it gave me, but for what it allowed me to reclaim after being discarded, forgotten, and replaced by my own family." I let the words hang in the air. And tonight, I want to announce the first project of the new Viola Legacy Fund, named for my mother. We have established a foundation to convert a residential property into transitional housing for disabled female veterans. That home, located on Harborview Drive, will no longer be occupied by private interests. I turned my head slightly, my gaze sweeping over Leland and Corinne. Their faces were ashen. The eviction notices, I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper, will be served tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp. The locks will be changed by noon. The deed has been legally and irrevocably reassigned. The legal work is complete. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I sat down. The silence was so absolute you could hear the flicker of the candles. Rosalind leaned over and whispered, "That was cleaner than a sniper shot." Afterward, they tried to approach me, their faces contorted with a mixture of rage and panic. "You set us up," Leland hissed, his voice low and venomous. "I set the record straight," I replied calmly. "You did all the rest to yourselves." Corinne stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "You're ruining everything. For what? Spite?" I looked directly at her. "You wore my husband's anniversary gift while you auctioned off his watch online. You slept in my bed and called it your home. It's not about spite, Corinne. It's about order." They fled in a storm of furious silence, leaving a wake of shocked whispers behind them. As I left, I saw them arguing beside my old SUV. They didn't yet know that Isabel had filed to have the registration revoked that morning. Let them drive it one last time. Let them feel the illusion of ownership for a few more hours. The reckoning was only just beginning. The days that followed were a quiet, methodical dismantling. The eviction notice was served exactly as promised. Their bank accounts were frozen. The summons for fraud and misappropriation of property arrived by courier. Their carefully constructed world was collapsing, and I watched from the quiet remove of my motel room, feeling not triumph but a grim sense of correction, as if I were resetting a bone that had been badly broken. One evening, a text came through from my grandson, a college sophomore who had been poisoned by his parents' narrative. "Grandma, I didn't know. I'm sorry." I stared at the words for a long time, a flicker of the old warmth stirring in my chest. Then, with a steady finger, I deleted the message and blocked the number. Some wounds cannot be healed with apologies. Some require the complete amputation of the infected limb. The final confrontation happened not in a courtroom, but in the living room of the house that was no longer mine. My attorney arranged it. I went alone. They were there, looking smaller, diminished. The arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind the raw, ugly truth of their greed. "I'm not here to negotiate," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "I am here to say this once. You took this house, this life, while I was fighting for my own in a hospital bed. You thought I would die. You counted on it." Corinne finally found her voice, sharp and brittle. "We did what was necessary. You abandoned this family years ago for your career." "I served my country," I said, my voice like ice. "While you were sending texts to Leland about how the old bird won't last the winter anyway, and it would finally all be ours. I have the phone records, Corinne. I have everything." Philip's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. The color drained from Corinne's face. It was the one piece of evidence they never knew I had. "This is my last visit," I said, rising. "Not to this house, to you. Consider this the final chapter." As I walked out, I didn't look back. 2 weeks later, I moved into a small, rented cottage on Whisperwind Cove. It was modest, but the front window looked out over the water. The Viola house opened its doors a month after that, with Sarah Morales at the helm. The local news covered the story, celebrating the anonymous donor who had turned personal tragedy into a beacon of hope for others. The narrative was no longer mine to control. It belonged to the community now. My life became quiet. I volunteered. I attended physical therapy. I learned the names of the birds that nested in the eaves of my cottage. The legal battles faded into paperwork handled by Isabel. Leland and Corinne moved away, their reputations in Port Blossom destroyed. They had tried to erase me, but in doing so, they had only succeeded in erasing themselves. One rainy afternoon, I sat on my small porch watching the water. The hollow space inside me, the one that had echoed with silence at the airport, was no longer empty. It was filled with a quiet strength, a peace I had forged in the fire of their betrayal. The true victory wasn't in taking back a house. It was in taking back my own story. It was in realizing that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up at the gate. And when no one does, it's about learning how to walk through it alone and build a new home on the other side, not with bricks and mortar, but with dignity and an unbreakable will. Not everything that is taken from us is a loss. Sometimes it is a liberation, clearing the path for a legacy we never knew we were meant to build.